Part 45. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 441. Chapter 441 Because I Like You. Her words were not only heard by the study committee, but also by Hee Chae-woo. The former blushed after hearing this, while the latter suppressed a smile. Jang Won-in also suppressed a smile. Su Jiao was not happy here, and Hee Chae-woo had already begun to drive people away. Now that we've finished talking about the topic, can we go? He asked. I don't know what's wrong with this woman. She still lingers on after finishing the questions. She keeps chatting there, mainly talking and laughing to herself like a fool. Not as good as Su Jiao. The smile of the study committee member, who was still smiling brightly and charmingly, suddenly froze. I have to ask my desk mate to come back, Hee Chae-woo said again. The study committee member immediately lowered his face and turned around to give Su Jiao a hard look, as if it was Su Jiao's fault that Hee Chae-woo drove her away. Su Jiao raised her mouth slightly as she listened to Hee Chae-woo's words, but she didn't see the study committee's disgusting eyes at all. It was Jang Won-in who glared back at her. I don't think she has any intention of coming back, the study committee member pouted and said aggrievedly. How can I come back if you don't leave? You are so shameless, Hee Chae-woo scolded. This woman sitting here really disgusted him. Although Su Jiao talks a lot while sitting here, he likes to listen anyway, but this woman talks just like making AP, it's annoying. The study committee member's face was very red at the moment. She felt aggrieved but felt that what Hee Chae-woo said was right, so she reluctantly walked away in this contradictory mood. As soon as the study committee left, Hee Chae-woo called Su Jiao loudly. Bride. Su Jiao turned her back to him and did not respond. Jang Won-in lowered his head and glanced at Su Jiao, then leaned over and whispered, Why don't you answer? You have a seat. Su Jiao also ignored her. Jang Won-in stood up straight, looked at Hee Chae-woo and spread his hands helplessly. Hee Chae-woo stood up with a helpless smile, walked over to Su Jiao and patted her shoulder gently, saying, Jiao, go back, otherwise I will be alone. You can't keep occupying Jang Won-in's seat, and you won't let others sit. Hee Chae-woo used Jang Won-in to talk about things. Seeing that Su Jiao ignored him, Hee Chae-woo winked at Jang Won-in. Jang Won-in immediately understood and started to help Hee Chae-woo coax Su Jiao. Jiao, go back, look, I've never sat down, don't you feel bad, Jang Won-in said aggrievedly. Su Jiao was slightly moved after listening to Jang Won-in's words. After a few seconds, she sat up straight and stretched out her hand. Jang Won-in looked confused, but Hee Chae-woo understood. He immediately stretched out his hand to support Su Jiao and said, Xiao Yuzai is here to take you home. Su Jiao stood up with a cold snort and followed Hee Chae-woo. Jang Won-in was dumbfounded and thought, so this is enough. Su Jiao, who was helped back by Hee Chae-woo, glanced at the study committee member in the front row who kept glancing at this side. She did not sit down directly, but looked at the study committee member for a while. Then she snorted and sat down proudly. No one can take away what belongs to me, I don't care what kind of little ant you are, Su Jiao said in a moderate voice. Hee Chae-woo could only hear a little bit clearly, but he felt domineering just by hearing the word I am my mother spoken domineeringly by Su Jiao. After sitting down, Hee Chae-woo immediately took out a piece of bread, a bag of potato chips, and a bottle of milk from the hole in the table. He pushed all these things in front of Su Jiao and said, Here they are all for you. Su Jiao looked at it and said, Others are asking for forgiveness, why are you still holding snacks? Because you like it. Hee Chae-woo held up half of his face and looked at Su Jiao and said. Su Jiao glanced at him and quickly looked away. Thank you, Su Jiao said uncomfortably. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 442. Chapter 442, Will it hurt him again? Thank you, Sujiao said uncomfortably. He Chiu suddenly felt that his status had become higher when he heard her say thank you. It was difficult to know that he wanted to hear these two words from Sujiao. When the school bell rang, He Chiu sat upright and said seriously and somewhat proudly, "You're welcome." Sujiao looked at his arrogant expression and felt that this guy really deserved a beating. Asterisk. When she went to the restaurant to eat at noon, Zhang Wanan didn't see the meal that Luzes who had bought a long time ago, nor did he see his people. The queue had already been long, like a long queue. Zhang Wanan looked along the queues but didn't see Luzes who. She sighed and prepared to walk to the end of the queue to queue up. She walked with her head down without raising her head when someone suddenly grabbed her. Zhang Wanan thought it was Luzes who. She raised her head with a bright smile but found it was Zhang Baihui. Her face turned into a bitter look in an instant. Zhang Baihui smiled awkwardly when he saw her look and asked, "What's wrong? Are you not happy to see me?" No. Zhang Wanan lowered her head and said with her fingers. She didn't want to look at anyone now, just like seeing Luzes whose handsome face. "Why don't you eat?" Zhang Baihui asked her again. Zhang Wanan pointed to the end of the queue and said, "I'm going to queue up." Zhang Baihui glanced behind him. The queue behind him was very long. It was estimated that there would be no delicious food when he got there. He waved Zhang Wanan to come closer to him. Zhang Wanan glanced at him and moved a step toward him. Then Zhang Baihui lowered his head and said in her ear, "I'll buy it for you, so don't wait in line." Zhang Wanan wanted to refuse, but Zhang Baihui pointed behind him. There was a tall and strong classmate standing behind him. Looking at the two of them again, they were as thin as chickens. If the eldest brother behind knew that Zhang Wanan had passed Zhang Bei in a while, if Huai jumped in line to buy food, it would be the end of the day for the two of them. So Zhang Wanan nodded and walked aside to find an empty seat to wait for Zhang Baihui. Luzes who didn't show up at noon. Zhang Wanan looked at the delicious food in front of him, but it tasted like nothing in his mouth. She poked the rice angrily to show her anger and dissatisfaction. She had already agreed to meet at noon in the morning, but she couldn't see anyone at noon, and she didn't know what she was busy with. She couldn't be busy without eating. Zhang Baihui looked at Zhang Wanan's look and hesitated for a while and asked, "Isn't it delicious?" Zhang Wanan shook her head and took a bite. It was delicious, but now she couldn't taste it. "I don't know what Luzes who is busy with now," Zhang Wanan muttered softly. Zhang Baihui heard her say Luzes whose name. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but in the end he said nothing. The meal was tasteless. Zhang Wanan walked out of the restaurant after eating and separated from the three others and went to the supermarket by herself. She was going to buy some food for Luzes who and take it to him, and take a look at him. But after learning about the food poisoning last time, Zhang Wanan walked into the school supermarket and didn't know what to buy. She lingered in front of the shelves and looked at them again and again but hesitated to take action because she didn't know if she would harm Luzes who again. She was just about to pick up a piece of bread to see if the date was fresh, but before she picked up the bread, she heard someone calling her, and the voice was very familiar. Zhang Wanan closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and turned her head to look over. Avril stood there and looked at her with a smile. Zhang Wanan had no expression when he looked at her, and he was not as happy as when he saw her before. Avril frowned slightly and walked up to her and asked hypocritically, "What's wrong? Are you unhappy?" Zhang Wanan saw her walking towards him and ignored her. He turned around, picked up a piece of bread and started studying it. Please give me a vote. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 443. Chapter 443. You like me the most. Zhang Wanan saw her walking towards him and ignored her. He turned around, picked up a piece of bread and started studying it. Avril was not angry because Jongwon ignored her. She also picked up a piece of bread and looked at it. "Want to buy bread?" she asked. "Well, I'll buy it for losers who." Jongwon was finally willing to talk to her. Avril raised her eyebrows slightly and glanced sideways at Jongwon. She obviously didn't expect Jongwon to be so caring. In her memory, losers who took great care of Jongwon. But she thought about it and smiled again, a mocking smile, and she said, "You want to send him to the hospital again? I have never seen such a careless girlfriend like you." She still remembered the scene that day. The ambulance came roaring. The incident had been circulated in the school for a long time, and many people were speculating whether the food losers who ate was given by his girlfriend. She emphasized the words hospital and girlfriend very seriously. Jongwon was stunned for a moment and put the bread down, then picked it up again after 3 seconds. She repeated this several times and picked it up again and held it in her arms. Avril looked at her funny and said, "The bread is almost broken in your arms." Jongwon ignored her words. She just said with a cold face, "You will never make the mistake of agreeing twice." Then Jongwon took the bread and walked to the cashier. Avril stood behind and raised her voice and reminded her kindly, "Losers who went to the office to help the teacher. I'm afraid the bread you bought was in vain." Jongwon rolled his eyes and went back to take a bottle of yogurt and hold it in his arms, then replied, "I'm happy to buy it for free." Avril snorted and stopped talking to her. After paying the money, Jongwon took the food and walked out. She glanced at the high school teaching building from a distance, wondering if Avril was telling the truth. She was looking at the teaching building over there in trance, when suddenly a hand patted Jongwon's shoulder from behind. Jongwon was startled, and she suddenly came back to her senses. "Brother, why are you scared?" Gu Jinchu walked around from behind and in front of her. Jongwon sighed when he saw it was Gu Jinchu. Gu Jinchu heard Jongwon sighing and immediately frowned and asked, "What's the matter? Are you not happy to see me? You liked me the most when you were a child." Jongwon rolled his eyes, "Forget it, I like losers who the most, okay? Don't try to lie to me." Since he didn't lie to her, Gu Jinchu thought that he might as well forget it. Now that the little girl has grown up, it's hard to lie to her. "What are you doing standing here?" he asked. "Let's take a look," Jongwon replied. "What are you looking at?" Gu Jinchu asked again. "Just take a look," Jongwon asked. "Just looking around, looking at the high school teaching building just casually. I think you're, he. Gu Jinchu didn't finish what he said, he looked at her and laughed maliciously. "Okay, I'm going to show my hand and ask you something," Jongwon said. "Ask, I will answer my questions, but only if I know something," Gu Jinchu said. "Losers who didn't go to the restaurant for lunch today. I heard he was at the teacher's place, right?" Jongwon asked. "Yes, who did you listen to?" "Don't worry about it. Since that's the case, I'm relieved. You can help me bring this to him and tell him that he wants to eat," Jongwon said, raising the bread and yogurt in his hand. She can no longer pass by recklessly. If she is caught by the student science teacher, it will be difficult to escape. Gu Jinchu lowered his head and glanced, "This is how you ask me to do things? Do you want me to leave it alone? Are you going? Be careful that loses who beats you up," Jongwon threatened. "Loses who? Who knew it would work?" Gu Jinchu took the thing and whispered, "I've convinced you, no, I've convinced you too." End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 444. Chapter 444. Are you following me? Who knew it would work? Gu Jinchu took the thing and whispered, "I've convinced you, no, I've convinced you too. Tell loses who if you have any trouble," Jongwon said and walked away. "Just left it to him like this? I really didn't take him seriously." "That's not right," he is here to buy things, not to work as a delivery person for free. Just as he was thinking about someone calling him from behind, Gu Jinshu turned around and saw Avril leaning against the door and looking at him. "Where are you?" Gu Jinshu asked. Avril slightly raised her eyebrows and walked toward him. She gradually approached Gu Jinshu and asked, "Are you following me?" "Huh? Am I following you? Why am I following you?" "I'm here to buy something, okay," Gu Jinshu said as he anxiously raised the things in his hands to defend himself. Avril took one look at those things and felt disgusted. She sneered and said, "As far as I know, it seems that Zhang Wanan bought this for Luz's Hu, right? Why is it here with you? Could it be?" Avril laughed before she finished speaking. "Hey! Can you please stop thinking nonsense? I brought it to Luz's Hu for Anan. I understand that friends' wives should not be bullied," Gu Jinshu defended himself anxiously. "I'm not thinking nonsense, you're just thinking too much," Avril said and walked away. Gu Jinshu looked back at Avril's back and felt that she was always inexplicable recently and didn't know what was going on. When Gu Jinshu returned to the classroom, Luz's Hu had already come out of the teacher's office. He walked over with the things and said, "Are you done with your work? I bought you some food." The head teacher is so serious that he doesn't know how to let you go to eat even if he catches you. Luz's Hu glanced at the bread and yogurt on the table and looked up at Gu Jinshu. He found it incredible that Gu Jinshu would not be considerate enough to buy things for him. Finally, Gu Jinshu was defeated under Luz's Hu's gaze. He spread his hands and said, "Okay, I'll confess, Anan bought it." "You are not allowed to call her Anan," Luz's Hu said this first. "Okay, Zhang Wanan," Gu Jinshu changed his words helplessly. Luz's Hu was then satisfied. He looked at the bread and yogurt on the table, looked at the time, and asked, "Has Anan eaten?" "How do I know this? I am only responsible for delivering food, and I don't know anything else," Gu Jinshu said. Luz's Hu put the food into the table hole, then stood up and walked out. "Hey, why are you going?" Gu Jinshu shouted from behind. "Let's see if Anan has eaten," Luz's Hu said. "Class will start soon," Gu Jinshu reminded. "It's okay, please ask for leave for me and I'll be back in a while," Luz's Hu walked out persistently. "No, class is about to start soon. Come over there." And Anan, "No, Zhang Wanan can't get out either," Gu Jinshu chased after him and said. Luz's Hu finally realized what he was doing. He stopped in the corridor and looked at the other side. Why didn't he think of this problem just now? Look at you, as soon as you meet an Ans, no, Zhang Wanan's matter, you lose your mind. Thanks to me as a good brother, Gu Jinshu didn't forget to praise himself while belittling Luz's Hu. Luz's Hu ignored him and went back to the classroom. He took out the bread and yogurt and took them apart to eat. He didn't like bread, but the one Zhang Wanan bought was so delicious to him. It was as if what he was eating was not bread, but some delicacy from the mountains and seas. "Be careful not to go into the hospital again." Avril came in from the outside and walked up to Luz's Hu and said. Luz's Hu looked up at her. Avril smiled at him and walked away. Seeing that Luz's Hu was about to get angry, Gu Jinshu hurried over and pressed his shoulders, saying, "Forget it, I think she's been a little unusual lately. Don't be like her. Eat quickly, eat." End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 445. Chapter 445, Does she consider you and me friends? Zhang Wanan bought this for you. Are you willing to leave it here and not eat it? Eat it quickly, Gu Jinshu said again. Luz's Hu endured it but did not get up. Gu Jinshu also breathed a sigh of relief and said, "We are all friends. I don't know what has happened to her recently. Let's just not get along with her." Luz's Hu snorted coldly, looked at Gu Jinshu and asked, "Friends? Does she regard you and me as friends?" "What do you mean?" Gu Jinshu was puzzled. "It's not interesting," Please be more careful, Loses Who said angrily, and stopped talking nonsense. What Loses Who said to Gu Jinchu was confusing. He thought about it for a long time and couldn't figure out what Loses Who meant. There is also Avril Lavigne's recent abnormality. In his opinion, it may be a woman, so he is a little angry. At any rate, Gu Jin had great intentions at first, so if he couldn't figure it out, he simply stopped thinking about it. In the afternoon, after Loses Who finished writing his papers, he asked the teacher to leave a few minutes early. He originally wanted to pick up Zhang Wanan from the junior high school, but after thinking about it, he turned back and went to the canteen. I didn't go to dinner at noon and didn't say anything to the little girl, so I have to make up for it now. Loses Who went into the supermarket and picked up a few bags of potato chips, a few Snickers bars, some candies, and finally a yogurt. He walked out of the school canteen with a bag of snacks when the bell just rang. Then Loses Who began to walk quickly towards the junior high school. Now that school was over, everyone was walking downstairs. It must be difficult for him to go up. After thinking about it, he stood at the top of the stairs and waited. If there are no special circumstances, Zhang Wanan can come out quickly every time after school, and this time is no exception. Although everyone was wearing the same school uniform, Loses Who still saw Zhang Wanan at a glance. He originally wanted to call her, but when he saw Zhang Baihui next to Zhang Wanan, his face darkened. Zhang Wanan obviously noticed Loses Who, but she didn't show any excitement this time and just glanced at him. Loses Who didn't wait for Zhang Wanan to come over, and he didn't go over either because the flow of people blocked them. He was tall and could easily see the people on the other side of the crowd. He didn't know what Zhang Baihui said to Zhang Wanan. The little girl covered her mouth and laughed, and then patted Zhang Baihui's shoulder. Loses Who's face grew darker and darker as he watched this scene, but the people over there pretended that he didn't exist and were still talking. Loses Who endured it again and again but finally couldn't hold it in any longer. He raised his legs and walked across the crowd to get behind the two of them. Zhang Wanan, he called out coldly. But who knew that the little girl was so brave this time that she didn't even give him a look, she just said and continued talking to Zhang Baihui. Loses Who listened to the content of their chat and thought that it was so low-key to laugh like this on such a boring topic. Zhang Wanan. Loses Who called again. What are you doing? Zhang Wanan was finally willing to look back at him. Anan, I'm leaving first, see you tomorrow, Zhang Baihui said when he saw that the atmosphere between the two was not right. Zhang Wanan had already run away before Zhang Baihui could say anything. Loses Who looked at Zhang Baihui's back and snorted coldly, thinking that he was quite discerning. What's your name? You can't even speak to anyone anymore. I see you are scaring people away. Zhang Wanan pointed at Zhang Baihui's leaving back and said unhappily with his hands on his hips. Just tell me what you want to say, Loses Who said and raised the things in his hands. Zhang Wanan glanced at it but didn't answer. Instead, he turned around and walked away. Loses Who hurriedly followed and asked, What's wrong? Are you angry? Yes, I told them well and you came to scare them away. Can you not be angry? Zhang Wanan complained. That's not what I'm talking about, Loses Who said next to him. Please recommend monthly tickets, my dears. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 446. Chapter 446, If the sky falls, I will still hold it up. That's not what I'm talking about, Loses Who said next to him. But that's what I'm talking about. Zhang Wanan suddenly stopped and looked up at Loses Who. Loses Who also stopped in time and looked down at the angry little girl. Do you like talking to him that much? Loses Who asked, his words full of jealousy. Zhang Wanan was confused by one sentence. Zhang Wanan frowned in displeasure and asked, What do you mean I just like talking to him? Didn't I tell you? That's not what I meant, Luzes who said hurriedly. Then what do you mean? Jongwanan asked. The two stood opposite each other, and classmates wearing the same clothes passed by them one by one. When they walked past, they couldn't help but look at them a few more times, and whispered a few words when they were far away from them. Because the person standing there was Luzes who, and the girl standing opposite him might have some unclear relationship with him. The people in the school gradually disappeared, but the two of them stood there without saying a word. Jongwanan couldn't help but tighten her clothes as the cold wind blew. Luzes who saw the scene in his eyes. He frowned and reached out to zip up Jongwanan's coat and said, "It's not interesting, I'm just jealous," he said frankly. Jongwanan didn't expect him to be so honest. She was stunned for a moment, sniffed a few times, and asked, "Are you hungry?" Let me ask you, are you hungry since you didn't eat at noon?" Jongwanan said as he raised his feet and walked out. Luzes who hurriedly followed behind and naturally took her hand and said, "If you're not hungry, you won't be hungry if you have the delicious food from my little girl." Luzes who was very proud when he said this. Jongwanan glanced at his smug look, curled her lips, and asked, "You're not feeling uncomfortable anymore, are you?" "No, it's very comfortable, but I didn't go there at noon and I didn't tell you. Are you angry?" This question troubled him all afternoon. Jongwanan nodded. Luzes who felt nervous as soon as he saw Jongwanan nodding. He was about to explain when he heard Jongwanan's explanation voice. "Originally I was angry, but then I heard Brother Jinchu say that you were busy in the office and I wasn't angry anymore. Instead, I felt a little distressed." Jongwanan curled her lips and said. If she was really angry, she wouldn't be so kind as to buy Luzes who food. Luzes who breathed a sigh of relief after hearing what she said, and said, "Am I still afraid that you will be angry? Am I such a person who gets angry easily?" Jongwanan smiled. Luzes who rolled his eyes inwardly, thinking, who knows, maybe a little girl will get angry over a little thing in the future, but he was willing to coax, so that was enough. "I bought you something delicious," Luzes who said again, holding up the snacks that Jongwanan had not taken just now. Jongwanan took it very quickly this time, almost grabbing it, as if he was afraid that Luzes who would not give it to him if he was delayed for a second. Jongwanan took out a Snickers bar from the bag, opened it and held it up to Luzes who's mouth. Luzes who originally wanted to refuse, but after thinking about it he took a small bite because he was afraid that the little girl would be sad. Jongwanan watched him take a bite and nodded to express satisfaction. When she took a bite, she suddenly shouted, "What's wrong?" Luzes who was a little flustered by her surprise. We have been standing in the school for so long. A lot of people must have seen it, right?" Jongwanan opened her mouth in shock, and she only realized it. "That's right." Luzes who didn't panic. "Why aren't you nervous at all? If this goes viral in school and spreads to all the teachers, we will be doomed." Jongwanan was so panicked that he forgot to eat the Snickers bar in his hand. Luzes who stopped and bent slightly to wipe the chocolate from the corner of her mouth and said, "It's okay. If the sky falls, I will still hold it up." Recommended votes, monthly votes, and 5-star praise. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 447. Chapter 447. Where do you want to go to university? Luzes who stopped and bent slightly to wipe the chocolate from the corner of her mouth and said, "It's okay. If the sky falls, I will still hold it up." Jongwanan's heart calmed down inexplicably when she looked into Luzes who's eyes. She nodded obediently and didn't say anything more about it. However, Jongwanan was right to worry, but Luzes who did not break his promise. He did bear the falling sky. Asterisk. The two of them returned home, but when they opened the door, they felt that the whole house was deserted and lifeless. Luzes who glanced at the house for a few times before turning around and going out. Before the driver left, Loses who asked from afar, Uncle Lee, where are the people at home? He knew that Lin 11 and Lu Lin would not be back at this time, so he was asking Aunt Lu and Xiaolan. Oh, look, I forgot to mention it, Aunt Lu is not feeling well. Xiaolan accompanied her to the hospital, Li Shuhan said with a smile. After understanding the situation, Loses who nodded, went in and closed the door. As soon as he entered the door, he saw Zhang Wanan leaning against the wall with her hands behind her back, staring at the tips of her shoes in a daze. Loses who smiled and took out her slippers, then went over to knock her on the head and put her slippers at her feet and asked, "What are you doing?" Zhang Wanan stood up straight, sat down again, and slowly changed her shoes. As she changed them, she said sadly like a little adult, "What are the benefits of a big house? When there's no one around, it's like a huge box." Zhang Wanan's words pierced Loses who's heart. He sighed and said, "Yes, there is no benefit other than living in a comfortable place. Even if there is no one around, your words will be echoed." The two people looked at each other and smiled helplessly. When we can afford to buy a house in the future, don't buy such a big one, just buy enough to live in. After changing her shoes, Zhang Wanan hugged Loses who's arm and leaned on his shoulder. Loses who nodded. Honestly speaking, there are no other benefits to a big house except that it is comfortable to live in and maybe better at hide and seek. Mainly because when there are few people or when one person is alone, the overall score seems deserted and lifeless. It's time to go back to your room and do your homework. Lu Zexiang patted Zhang Wanan on the head and said. Zhang Xuan nodded and the two held hands and went upstairs. When she went back to her room to do her homework, Zhang Wanan started writing enthusiastically, but after a while she just lay down in a daze. She often did this, and Loses who had long been used to it. Loses who patted her on the back as usual, and Zhang Wanan also raised his head and glanced up as before. "Right well. If you don't know how, I'll teach you." "Don't lie down," Loses who said seriously. Zhang Wanan only nodded but did not sit up straight. Loses who was about to lift her up, but when he heard what Zhang Wanan said next, he was stunned and put down his hands to let her lie down. Zhang Wanan said, "You are about to take the college entrance examination. Have you ever thought about where to go to university?" Loses who thought for a while and then smiled. The smile was very forced, and he said, "It's still early, I haven't thought about it." Zhang Wanan turned to look at him seriously, and then smiled, "You haven't thought about it? Do you really think I'm stupid? Besides, time flies by so fast, it's getting late." Loses who suddenly felt at a loss for words and waved his hands and said, "I never thought about it. Hurry up and do your homework." Zhang Wanan knew that he didn't want to answer, so he didn't ask further. "Sooner or later you will ask," she thinks. Lin 11 came back as soon as they finished their homework. This time she came back a little early. The two of them were a little surprised at first, but they were no longer surprised when they saw her hands full of ingredients. Emotions have come back early to prepare for cooking. The two of them looked at each other and felt panicked for no reason. "Mom, what are you planning to do?" Zhang Wanan asked knowingly as she walked down the stairs. "Cooking, your Aunt Lu is not feeling well today. I gave her a day off after she came back from the hospital. It just so happened that Sister Xiaolan also went to take care of her, so the burden of cooking at home fell on me," Lin 11 said. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 448. Chapter 448, The end is near. "Mom, will my dad come back tonight?" Loses who walked over and took some of the ingredients from Lin 11's hand and said. "Come back," Lin 11 said. "Then since Dad is back, let's go out to eat, or ask Dad to bring some back from outside," Loses who added. Lin 11 put all the ingredients in the kitchen and looked back at Loses who. "What's the matter? Do you have any objections to me?" "No, I just thought you were tired after working all day, so don't." Before Luzes who finished speaking, he was interrupted by Lin 11. She asked, "What if I say I'm not tired?" "It's up to you," Luzes who pointed to the kitchen and said helplessly. Lin 11 snorted, washed his hands, put on an apron, and started chasing the two people standing at the door. "Don't stand there if you have nothing to do. Go and do whatever you need to do." Luzes Hu and Zhang Wanan glanced at the ingredients in the kitchen worriedly and sighed. It seemed that these ingredients had a short life and would be wasted again. The two of them turned back 3 times with each step. Lin 11 turned around and saw them reluctant to leave and asked coldly, "What's the matter? Are you reluctant? How about cooking you two together?" "Zhang Wanan, Luzes Hu. Why is this woman so cruel? Are you going to cook them? It's incredible." The two people shook their heads and thought that Lin 11 might be crazy and they wanted to leave this place of right and wrong. "Mom, don't make too much, it's easy to waste and leave you with more than you can finish," Luzes Hu reminded him while walking far away. The sound of knives chopping on meat was heard from the kitchen, and the hearts of those who listened were trembling. "Let's ask for help," Zhang Wanan nervously pulled Luzes Hu's clothes and said. Luzes Hu nodded and quickly led Zhang Wanan upstairs. The two of them dialed Lu Lin's phone number. Fortunately, he was not in a meeting and the call was answered in time. "Dad, this is Anan, when will you be back?" Zhang Wanan asked sweetly, holding the phone. "Anan, Dad will be back soon." "Is there anything you want to eat?" Lu Lin asked happily when he heard Zhang Wanan's voice. "It's such a blessing to receive a call from my daughter at this time after a busy day." This is what Zhang Wanan and Luzes Hu were waiting for. The two of them excitedly slapped a silent palm and Zhang Wanan spoke seriously about what he wanted to eat. "Dad, I want to eat mapo tofu, fish-flavored shredded pork, braised pork ribs, and saliva chicken." "Well, that's all for now," Zhang Wanan thought for a while and said. "You want to eat so much? Why don't you clean it up and Dad will go back to pick you up later, and let's go out to eat as a family." Lu Lin thought for a while and said. "No, no, no," Zhang Wanan said in a panic. Seeing that Zhang Wanan was about to lose control, Luzes Hu answered the phone and said, "Dad, it's me. You bought it and we can eat it at home. It feels like eating as a family at home." Lu Lin felt that what Luzes Hu said made sense when he heard it, so he said cheerfully, "Okay. I'll order food in a moment, you can just wait at home." The two of them were so excited that they were about to jump up. Since their goal had been achieved, they simply put the phone down and stopped caring about the person on the other end of the phone. Now that they were sure that they wouldn't have to eat Lin 11's cooking at night, the two of them were much happier. They rushed downstairs to get 2 bottles of drinks, sat on the sofa and watched TV and drank. Lin 11 wanted to take care of it when she saw the two of them getting drinks, but when she saw how happy they were, she didn't. Perhaps the two of them figured out that she was good at cooking and wanted to celebrate in advance. But it wasn't until Lu Lin came back that Lin 11 realized that she had thought too much. Lu Lin came back early today and asked his secretary to order the meals in advance, so he didn't waste much time waiting for the meals. Please recommend monthly tickets. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 449. Chapter 449. How dare you do it next time? He felt relieved after taking all kinds of meals and placing them safely in the car. Carefully started the car and prepared to go back to feed his son and daughter. However, Lu Lin, who had always been innocent in front of his children, had no idea that the two children were taking advantage of him. When Lu Lin took the dishes back, he smelled the familiar smell of oil smoke as soon as he walked in. He frowned slightly and thought to himself, what idiot was cooking without turning on the range hood? But then he thought about it and his eyes widened in surprise. His intuition told him that Lin 11 was cooking in the kitchen. Because he just remembered that Lin 11 called him a few hours ago to tell him that Aunt Lu was not feeling well and that she had given her a few days off, and Xiaolan also went with her. So if nothing else goes wrong, Lin 11 is the one in the kitchen. This woman actually went to the kitchen again, which is really disturbing. Lu Lin frowned and hurried to the kitchen. As expected, the person in the kitchen was Lin 11. At this moment, the woman was troubled by her stupid behavior. She could be heard coughing from a distance. Sound. Lu Lin turned around, put the food on the dining table and walked into the kitchen. After entering, he quickly turned off the fire, turned on the range hood, and opened the window. The series of actions he performed was so familiar and fast. He has done this kind of thing countless times. Why don't you turn on the range hood or open the window? Are you resisting choking? Lu Lin asked. Lin 11 was a little surprised when she saw him come in, and she directly ignored Lu Lin's question. Today, ahem, you came back so early, ahem, she coughed and asked. Lu Lin glared at her fiercely and said, if I come back later, you will cough to death. Hearing what he said, Lin 11 smiled awkwardly and pointed at a pot of soup to change the subject. She pointed at it like a show-off and said, look, the chicken soup I cooked must be delicious. Lu Lin glanced at it, took the heat-insulating cloth and lifted the lid of the pot. After lifting it, he felt a headache when he looked at the contents inside. He pointed at the bottom of the pot and asked, what are these? A few pieces of dried chicken? Where's the chicken soup? No. No more. Lin 11 also stretched out his head to take a look, lowered his head and wrung his fingers. Why did you go into the kitchen again? Lu Lin asked. How about waiting to starve to death? Lin 11 knew that he had made a mistake, and he lacked the confidence to speak. Do you think you won't starve to death like this? Lu Lin asked persistently. Stop it, it won't happen next time. Lin 11 lowered her head and said like a child who made a mistake. You are so brave, don't you dare again next time. Stop it, I bought vegetables, Lu Lin said, taking her hand and pulling her out. I don't know why this woman is so obsessed with cooking that she can't help herself. The main reason is that the cooking is delicious, but this, what does it count? Children playing house? Lu Lin thought and shook his head helplessly. Why did you buy food? Lin 11 walked out and looked at a table of packaged dishes and asked. Yes. Before Lu Lin could say anything, Zhang Wanan and Lu Zizhu jumped out of nowhere. They ran out and looked at the dishes on the table and screamed strangely, wow, Dad bought so many delicious foods. It seems that we can't even eat what Mom made, Zhang Wanan said with an exaggerated expression. Yes, these alone are enough to eat, and my mother may have to work in vain, Lu Zizhu also sighed. No, what's going on, isn't it? Come on, take the chopsticks to eat, Dad, go and wash your hands. Zhang Wanan interrupted Lu Lin again and pushed him towards the bathroom. Lu Lin was confused when he was pushed away, thinking, didn't you ask me to buy it? Why does it feel like he took the initiative to buy these things now? End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 450. Chapter 450. We can be big stars now. Although Lu Lin was confused, Lin 11, as a bystander, had already seen clearly. She could understand each sentence just by looking at the two children. She looked at the table of dishes and snorted, that's right, you two can go learn acting. Lu Zizhu fell silent when he heard Lin 11 say this. On the other hand, Zhang Wanan grinned and asked, really? Can I really do that? Then can I be a big star? Stupid, Lu Zizhu scolded in a low voice. Even though people have noticed it, she still doesn't know it. When others insult her, she thinks they are complimenting her. She can't hear good or bad words, so it's true to call her stupid. Yes, you can all become big stars, Lin 11 angrily pinched Zhang Wanan's tender little face. Zhang Wanan narrowed her eyes at the compliment. She was about to dance and say something when she heard Lu Zizhu call her. "Anan, come to me." Lu Zizhu extended his hand and waited for her to come over. Zhang Wanan looked at him and walked over, then hugged his arm and hung up. Zhang Wanan rubbed her little face on Lu Zizhu's arm and said happily, "Did you hear that? Mom said we can become big stars." Zhang Wanan's eyes were shining when he said this. Lu Zizhu was speechless for a while and hit her head hard and said, "You should be more careful." Huh. Zhang Wanan covered her aching forehead and didn't quite understand what Lu Zizhu said. Lu Zizhu sighed, bent down and said a few words in Zhang Wanan's ear, and then Zhang Wanan looked at Lin 11 with an awkward smile. I won't be a big star anymore," she said awkwardly. "Have people seen through their little emotional tricks a long time ago?" She thought her acting skills were really good. Lin 11 sat on the chair with her hands clasped together and looked at the two people and snorted coldly, "You're still playing tricks with me, huh?" Zhang Wanan looked at Lu Zizhu, then let go of his arm and walked around in despair. "Where are you going? Are you going to eat soon?" Lin 11 suddenly panicked when he saw the little girl running away. "I thought it was because it was too heavy and I couldn't bear it." "Wash your hands," Zhang Wanan replied loudly. A false alarm. When Zhang Wanan sat at the table again and ate the food Lu Lin had packed back, she suddenly felt that she was so happy. The food was delicious and appetizing, mainly because she didn't have to eat Lin 11's poisonous food. Originally Zhang Wanan wanted to eat more, but Lu Zizhu stopped him. He said, "It's not good to eat too much at night. Don't eat. Let's go out for a walk later." Zhang Wanan thought for a while and put down her chopsticks obediently. Lu Zizhu didn't expect Zhang Wanan to be surprisingly well behaved this time. He smiled with satisfaction and put down his chopsticks after taking a few bites. "Mom and Dad, you eat slowly, I'll take Anan for a walk in the garden outside," Lu Zizhu said and pulled Zhang Wanan to stand up. Lu Lin and Lin 11 nodded. After they went out, Lu Lin smiled and said, "Don't tell me, they really look like a young couple." "That's good." Lin 11 also smiled. When he walked to the door, Lu Zizhu first put on Zhang Wanan's coat and then put it on himself, but before one of his arms could reach into the sleeve, Zhang Wanan pulled it off. Lu Zizhu looked back at her and asked, "What's wrong? Don't you want to go out?" "No, why don't you wear the clothes we bought together?" Zhang Wanan said, tugging at her sleeves. Lu Zizhu smiled and said, "Put it on, just wait while I go upstairs to put it on." Then he hung the clothes he was about to wear at the door and went upstairs. When he came down wearing the couple's clothes they bought together, Zhang Wanan smiled with satisfaction, stretched out her hand and naturally hung on his arm, saying, "Let's go." Asking for votes. End of this chapter.